Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar. We're going to be discussing building dynamic applications with Scalr and Chef. So we're going to spend most of our time doing a technical deep dive into how you can build an application by integrating Scalr and Chef and gaining the benefits of both. So we'll go over that in detail in just a little bit. We're going to wait for just a couple of more minutes to give more people the chance to join in. So while we're waiting, just a bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, so if you have to hop off or if you want to review it afterwards, then you can get the recording. You'll get it within 24 hours after we're done here, and you're free to, of course, share that with your colleagues. As we're going through the webinar, if you have any questions, please put those questions in the webinar questions menu on the GoToWebinar questions menu, and we'll do our best to get to those questions as we go through the webinar. And if we don't, we'll follow up over email and address as many of those as we can. But please keep those coming, and we'll try to address as many of those as you can. All right, so I think we're good to go to get started. So first, I'd like to thank Lynn Caldwell for joining me today. Lynn, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm a solutions architect for Scalr. I specialize in cloud automation. I've worked with Chef and some type of cloud for about 7 years.
All right, so Lynn is going to be taking us through the technical demo in a little bit. So first thing I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page for is just our agenda for today, and then a brief overview. So first we'll go over what Scalr is briefly, and some basic terminology and concepts, and then we'll do the same for Chef, just for the things that we'll be talking about today. We'll review quickly the actual application that we'll be building, and then we'll spend the rest of our time on the demo itself, and then if we have time at the end, we'll answer some further questions. But we really like to answer those as we're doing the demo, so make sure you keep those coming. Okay, so first, what is Scalr all about, and what is Scalr's mission? So Scalr's mission is to help enterprises capture the opportunity that the cloud presents. And we talked a little bit about this in our previous webinar, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But as we see it, the opportunity or the promise that enterprises are looking at when they either move to the cloud or integrate it into their strategy, into their infrastructure strategy in some capacity, that promise is agility, speed, being able to leverage the cloud to empower the business to move faster, innovate faster, and compete on a global scale. Obviously, there are other benefits as well, but we feel that a lot of them can be summed down into this concept of speed, and that is being backed up by the conversations that we're having with our customers, as well as the analyst reports out there. But when you're doing this at the enterprise level and you're considering all the different constituencies at the enterprise, whether that is security or finance or the actual end users, the DevOps engineers, it's not enough to just go after this goal of agility. It becomes going after this goal without compromising on security, without compromising, of course, on the productivity of your users, and without compromising on cost control and visibility. So Scalr's mission is to help enterprises achieve that goal of business agility and really make the most out of their multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environments without compromising on security, compliance, cost, or the actual productivity of their users. Typically, we see enterprises have different approaches to how they want to capture this opportunity. So the way that Scalr is different from the traditional cloud management platform is with the design premise or the model that the actual tool uses. So I'm going to go through this quickly. So typically, after enterprises ran into some sort of issue with a distributed model that gives people a lot of direct access and caused some sort of cost overage or some sort of compliance issue, they will go to the more traditional CMP or centralized model, where they'll have their departments and their different teams go through the the approved or built out set of requirements that is being handled by the CMP. So for example, you can see in this example that I have my department or my line of business with the different teams in it going through the central IT responsibilities box. And what the CMP does for central IT here is it manages the role-based access control or a self-service catalog or policy management for all policy types and all users. And this can work with one team or maybe two teams or two different departments. The question becomes, what happens when you have a lot of exception handling? Because you're essentially building out this template that everything needs to fit into. But what happens when you consider different types of users and different types of requests? And these requests can be, I have different types of users from QA engineers who just need to spin up the same box over and over again, all the way up to more advanced DevOps engineers who might be doing something more like the Chef integration that we'll be working on today. How do you handle those exceptions at scale? So when those exceptions and new tools that start to be being adopted by these teams, this is where IT's efforts become a little strained, and IT might be perceived as an inhibitor to agility, because you're back at that same problem of, I have to find a way to check all my boxes when it comes to security and compliance and cost, but I also want to empower my users to be more productive and faster, which is essentially our ultimate goal. Again, adapting to organizational changes become difficult because everything has to be an exception in this model. And when you onboard another team that is maybe more advanced and has more requests and has more exceptions and uses Kubernetes and uses another cloud platform like Amazon or VMware, Google, want to integrate with further tools, this becomes more and more of an issue, and IT becomes even more strained. Something that makes the matters worse is that typically in these models, policies are being applied app by app. So it means policies being packaged into each individual application, so adapting to changes become difficult. And as those requests keep coming in, IT gets to a place where it really only has two options. What do they do with this team, this more advanced team? Once that team becomes more advanced than the other ones and it has too many requests, do you cut them out of the system, or do you force them to go through the system you have built out for them and break their agility? So the options become either to increase headcount to meet that demand. If you hire more and more people to handle more and more exceptions, then maybe you could get to a place where you're able to do that effectively, but that means basically throwing money at the problem until it's solved. And the other option being to slow down the business by having everybody go through that set process. So neither option is good. Scalr takes a different approach. Scalr takes a federated model, which essentially flips that model and puts the developers and the application developers and the actual users closer to the platforms. So we begin by setting a baseline policy layer. We call this the corporate layer, the first level of administration. And this is a baseline policy guardrail that applies to everybody. And you can apply this either to everyone in the organization or apply it selectively to certain departments or lines of business. If in the earlier model you saw that the departments or the lines of business sat here on top and had to go through a request type of paradigm, here they have the first level admin that set the baseline policies for them, and they are granted more autonomy to build their own guardrails and establish essentially their own policies, which will then as well be inherited by their team. This is very similar to how, for example, the US government will work, where you'll have the administration on the top, and then you will have your state and your city, and each level of management can set their own policies and set their own rules, but still has to adhere to a certain baseline of rules that was set by the level above it. This way, the exceptions and the context that's required is being handled at the appropriate level for each individual team or for each department, and corporate IT or central IT or whoever owns that function in the enterprise is able to still set those baseline policies. So even if it's something as simple as Amazon introduces a new set of instance types and you want to make those available to everybody, you can set that at a certain level, and then that will be inherited by all subsequent layers of management. So this is a model designed for modern IT processes, which gives delegated autonomy to departments and lines of business without sacrificing security or cost, because you are establishing those guardrails. These guardrails, instead of being applied application by application, are applied at the organizational level selectively. So it means that if I'm applying something for this department at the second level admin layer, that policy will now be available for everybody in the subsequent environments. You see that there's a color coding to this. So what this means, you'll see this in the actual product. This is the way that the Scalr architecture is built. We will be operating today mostly in this environment level or the team layer, because we will be operating as a power user, as a user who needs to go in and build an application. But as we're working through this, you'll notice that the user that we're working as will have all these different policies or all these different guardrails that were set for them, so that you won't have to worry about it. So it's kind of like the difference between playing bowling with and without bumpers. You really can't make a mistake. So just to wrap this up, this model presents multiple admin tiers, multiple role-based access control tiers, because in reality, you have more than two types of users at the enterprise. You have more than the end user on one end and the super admin on the other. You typically will have multiple levels of administration, which this model accommodates. Policies are applied at the organizational level and not app by app. So it means that any policy that is set up here at the corporate layer, this orange scope, will then be propagated, inherited by all the other layers. You're better able to adapt to organizational changes and policy changes with this model because of that inheritance option. And to sum it up, it means that we gain greater autonomy for teams and users, results in a greater speed at scale, because you want to make these teams more productive, but you still want to maintain your corporate policy. Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of what Scalr is and how it works, I want to go over some basic concepts, basic Scalr terminology that will help us as we go through the tutorial and the demo itself. And then I'll kick it over to Lynn to talk us more through Chef specifically. Okay, so the basics for today that we need to talk about are environments, farms, and roles. So as we saw earlier, Scalr operates at 3 different layers of management, the first one of which being the corporate scope, and the second one being this account scope, this green second level admin scope. This is where you can have your multiple business units, and each one of these business units, as we said earlier, is its own state, a compartmentalized cloud deployment that is completely separate from the other ones. Within each one of these Scalr accounts, you will have your environments marked in blue, which we saw earlier as well. This was that team level. So here, just as an example, I marked these as dev, test, stage, and prod, and these can belong to any one of these accounts. So, and of course, these can represent stages of an application lifecycle or locations or different teams. It really is up to what makes sense for your organization. Within these environments, which is where we're going to be spending most of our time, you'll see policies being applied. So whether that is a basic user who just needs to use the service catalog, or a very advanced user who uses a Power Console or the API, certain policies will be applied around which security groups can be used, or budgets, or things of that nature. A farm inside these environments will essentially be an application. So a farm is a description of the desired state of an application. It's everything about how an application should look like and behave at any given time. So you can build these applications, which is exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to build a farm that orchestrates Docker containers onto instances and deploys images into them using Chef. And then the desired state of that application is captured both in the UI and in code, and then is able to be packaged as a service catalog item or edited by other advanced users. So just to hit on that point, these farms are application blueprints. They describe the desired state of an application, and they contain all the requirements for that application, from infrastructure to automation rules and security, and they can also be coded. So you can also use them as an infrastructure as code component, which we'll discuss in a future webinar. Once you're done designing a farm, you're then able to package that into a service catalog item. And if you have any users who value ease of use over the flexibility, you can make this available for them in a one-click provisioning type of experience. Otherwise, you could also always use the Power Console if you're a more advanced user to be able to relaunch that application. Okay, so hopefully all of this makes sense, and we will iterate some of this in the actual demo. So I'd like to kick it over to Lynn to walk us through some of the basic Chef concepts that we'll need for this demo.
Thank you. A couple of things we'll be using in this demo will be a Chef server, which is essentially your main hub for your nodes, your cookbooks, your attributes, anything that would make up the automation behind that. The cookbooks will be the configuration for the application, so they'll tell the server what gets installed, how it gets installed, what attributes, what permissions, those type of things that go down. So when we install Docker, it will lay down a version of Docker, it will install the image from Docker Hub, and it'll map the ports as part of the demo we're going to run through. The next thing that we'll utilize will be attributes within the Chef environment. So we wrote a very simple cookbook, which I'll show here in a second. And what it does is it's attribute driven. So it has a set of defaults, but you can change those attributes, and we'll show how to change those within the farm and by the farm role. So we can have the exact same cookbook run and come out with two different outcomes. So one will have like an HTTP, and the other one will just be a Jenkins box. They're both Docker containers, but they'll be completely, they're a different image. So what's next?
All right, so let me just quickly run us through what we're going to be building, and then I'll switch the presenter role off to you, and we can get going.
Okay.
All right, so the demo for today, just like Lynn said, we're going to be deploying images with Docker containers. We're going to be using a Chef server and those cookbooks for bootstrapping those instances that have the actual containers on them. We'll see how we can edit those applications with attributes. And when we're done designing the application and deploying it and seeing that it works, we'll publish the whole thing as a service catalog item, which will mean that future users or users who value ease of use over the flexibility to be able to edit everything will be able to publish it with provision it with one-click provisioning. Finally, we'll also see how we can clean up the configurations on the Chef server, or rather how those get cleaned up automatically. And everything that we're going through, we'll do this in one of those environments that you saw earlier. So that means that that environment already inherited all the appropriate security and automation and cost policies that were required by the business unit or by whatever administration is relevant to that. We're not going to go into a lot of in-depth administrative role-based access control stuff today, but we do have another webinar about that dedicated specifically to security, compliance, and role-based access control that goes in depth into how to construct those ACLs that govern that. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend that that you check that out. And finally, and I swear I'll stop talking after this, finally, we do have step-by-step tutorial of everything that Lynn is gonna go through. So we'll make sure to send that to everybody over email once we're done here. And you can also find that on the Scalr wiki. All right, so Lynn, I'm gonna pass over the presenter role off to you. So just give me a quick second here. And yep, here we go.
Okay, let me know when you can see my screen. Okay.
Yep, I got it.
Okay, so the first thing we want to show is where the Chef server is set up. So your Chef administrator gave you access to the server you need to configure. So it would be over here, you can go through, and what we do is add our Chef server. So the URL, you'll get a client for the most part, and then there's a validator key that you would use. You fill in those few things and save it, and that then gives you access to Chef. What we'll do is just run through the tutorial that we're going to hand out and just kind of show you how this works. So what we'll do first is build out a new farm. We'll name it. We'll select a cost center. So for billing, it'll show that on our budget, this will come out of that. And as we add farm roles, we'll want to add one with the Chef client already installed. So pre-create, it's got a Chef client.
So just real quick about roles. So roles in Scalr, as Lynn is working through that, are essentially the building blocks of your application. So these could be anything from your load balancer to just a server. So what Lynn is using here is a pre-made role that already has the Chef client automation on it. Yeah, go ahead.
And as you can see, we've got the police badges. So these are items that are enforced from above, as mentioned earlier. So these are the only sizes we can use. And then there's only a couple network settings we can choose once we get in here. So there's only 2 VPCs that are allowed. We'll go ahead and add this to the role. We'll actually rename this one Apache. And then we'll add one more, which is the exact same thing, just to show that they're the same. We'll name this one Jenkins. So what we'll do next is we'll go down to our Chef setup, and we will tell this to bootstrap with Chef. We're going to select our Chef server that we set up earlier. This is pushed down again from up above. We can configure our run list here, so it does give us the UI. We're just going to use recipes for right now.
So what you're looking at right now are the recipes that are stored on that Chef server that you set up earlier?
Correct. So all the recipes or roles that we would see are all right here. So been uploaded. And to kind of show that that has been uploaded to our Chef server, we can knife commands for those that are familiar with knife, and we'll see that our cookbook has been uploaded. Generally, this would be uploaded by like a CI/CD process where you test your cookbooks, that type of we'll show UI as well. So here's your cookbook here. One thing to note, and before we get too far into it, is the cookbook itself. This is a very simple cookbook, but it is attribute driven. So we can change the attributes on this to make this do different things. By default, it's going to do just Apache, but I'll show you how we can use Scalr to Jenkins. So we'll go back here and we'll get our attributes out of it. Relatively easy. The attributes can be copied directly from the demo or from the tutorial, if you will. So we'll grab those in here. One thing to note with our Chef environment is it's a demo environment, so it does not have SSL. So we'll go ahead and turn that off. And then for Jenkins, we would do the exact same thing. We'll just run through. We'll choose our Chef server. We'll configure the run list, which is just a recipe for this one. And you can actually type up here to kind of get it to specify which one you want. All right, so here would be Jenkins. And again, we'll have to turn that off. Okay, so what we're doing with these is you can see our container name. We named, let me duplicate this. I'll show this. So our container name is going to be Jenkins. The image we're going to use is Jenkins. If you look on Docker Hub, there is a Jenkins one. Jenkins generally maps 8080, but we're going to use Docker to map port 80 to 8080 just for demonstrations, and we turn off the default wizard. With Apache, I didn't say that. With Apache, we're just going to map 80 to 80, and it's just going to start that, the HTTP daemon. So we'll go ahead and We'll save this. And then we can go ahead and start this, and this will kick off our server builds. So while these are pending, it'll take them a minute to come up. What they're going to do is, they're going to go ahead and create this server record in Scalr, then it's going to reach out to the cloud, which is AWS, and it's going to deploy the instance. It'll wait for the OS to boot. The Scalarizer agent was already on this image, so when it comes up, it'll do some of the configuration, and then it'll kick off Chef. And we can actually look at the Chef logs once it's done through Scalr to kind of show you can get that information as well.
So while we're waiting for that to come up, we have a good question here. So it looks like right now you're deploying one container per instance, right?
Right, and that's more for demo purposes. Okay. We could actually put a loop in the cookbook and actually put multiple containers on one instance if it were big enough. But this just made it easier so that we could kind of show one for one.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So while we're waiting for that, we can also go back to the farms page and take a quick look at how you can package this whole thing as a service catalog item. We'll see if we can go through that right now or if we have to wait for it to come up.
So you click on the three dots over to the side. These will give you your context menu. About 3/4 way down, there is a create offering. Once you click on it, you simply name it. We'll just leave it named the same. When you hit create, this will actually give you the JSON representation for the farm and what's configured within it. So you can see where it goes to, which security groups, the bootstrap configuration, the run list, the Docker attribute, or the attributes that would kick off the Docker build. Everything's in here. We'll select category, Docker, and choose yes. And we save it. And I believe you go here to see it. Does it take
so you can go to the, no, you just click on the service catalog and not my applications.
Okay.
Yeah, so this way administrators or advanced users can build these farms. And these farms, right now we did something very basic where we just took a couple of different roles, which were essentially one server per role. But each one of these roles is more like a tier in an application. So it can be a scalable role that scales up and down based on automation rules. And it can also contain cloud services like application load balancers or other types of cloud services in there as well. We do have more information about exactly how farms look. We can take a look if we already have those servers up, and if not, we can briefly take a look at the farm. So yeah, I see that we have one of those servers already up.
So the Apache Box is obviously faster. It's already up. You can show this is just a fault. Apache comes up and says that it works. A couple things we can show here is we keep an orchestration log because Chef is considered orchestration. It goes in the orchestration log. There's a few of them. And you can actually see the client output just like you would if you ran this locally or you looked at the Chef log on the local box. So you would see everything that goes through all the way down to the fact that it even maps the ports for the cookbook. All the various settings are right here, and they're easy for the app owner using Chef to go in and look. They don't have to go fumble through the box or try to find where that goes. We can see the boxes do show up in Chef, and the attributes are set here. So the attributes that we passed over, I'll do Jenkins just to keep it consistent, are now set on the box. So each Chef run will just use these attributes. Our other box should be up. Jenkins takes a little bit longer, but now you have a Jenkins box. So we took one cookbook here. We took one cookbook and we used attributes out of Scalr to to drive what actually went on the box. If you wanted to pass something else in there, like a MySQL or something like that, you could. But the only real difference was right here in the attributes. So rather than write like a wrapper cookbook or have to maintain the like a JSON boot file, you can do that directly out of Scalr. And then you want to show when we shut them down now?
Yeah, so once you're finished designing your application and you did whatever it is that you needed to do with it, like for example, packaging it up for the service catalog or using that JSON representation for it for storing it in Git or firing it up from the API. When you terminate these, there's also cleanup work that takes place as well, which is what Lynn is going through now.
So when we go ahead and terminate the farm, it'll terminate the. So it takes a couple of minutes for everything to kind of sink in it to get them out of the cloud. Once they shut down the cloud, one of the larger issues we used to have with Chef was cleanup. A lot of people wouldn't clean up, so they would delete their server out of AWS, or they would clean up their app. We would still have nodes in Chef that we're not reporting. So what Scalr will go ahead and do is these will disappear once this termination finishes. This takes, what, about 2 minutes for everything to process through and these to actually terminate out of the cloud.
Mm-hmm. So essentially what this means is that if you have a large group of people using Chef, and this Chef server serves a large number of users, these servers that are on AWS or on other clouds are going to go up and down, and what you usually end up with is a huge configuration mess on your Chef server. So you have all of these references to servers that maybe don't exist, and it's and there's no way from within Chef to track what is actually running and what's not. So this is why it's more valuable for the administrative side when these farms get scaled down, because there's also a policy in Scalr that can shut down certain, like for example, let's say that in a testing environment, everything gets shut down after 5 days or something like that. Once something will get shut down, terminated, it will also be deleted from here. And here I think we see that those nodes were deleted.
Right, so now they've showed terminated in Scalr, so they're no longer in AWS. If we go to Chef and refresh, they've now been cleaned up. So it's actually cleaned up the environment. It helps with all that.
Sure. And we have another good question here. So if you can go back to the farm page, the question is about how do I manage which region or availability zone I'm deploying instances into. So we can see that on the farms page for each individual role.
Right. So as we imported this role specifically, it's only in US West. We can import it. It's on the roles page, I believe. We can go here, and we could import it for US East as well. It would all be imported here. Then it would have multiple options when you go to add your farm role. Like maybe one of these is it. Yeah. So here you go. This one is available in all these regions. You can also set policy so that as an app owner can only deploy to US West.
Yeah, so regions can be either governed by policy or they can be packaged into the role itself. And for availability zones, you can set that at the role level and decide exactly how you want to distribute the servers that are a part of that role in different availability zones. Okay, so I'm seeing that that we do have a few other questions that I don't know if we have time to get to. But if you want to learn more about what I said about distributing between different availability zones or regions, we have a webinar that we did about disaster recovery. You can find that on our resources page as well. And we went pretty in depth there about how to distribute servers between availability zones and how to do different weighted decisions or automate, for example. There, the example, I believe it was database that gets replicated between availability zones, so we can fail over between them. So a lot more info on that there as well. Okay, so was there anything else that you wanted to show us, Lynn, or was that most of it?
I think that was it.
All right, great. So I'm gonna take over the presenter role once again, real quick. Okay, so let's quickly recap what we went over. So essentially, what we did is we built an application with Scalr and Chef. Let me just get rid of this go to webinar menu. So we used the Scalr environment that was set up for us as a power user, as a user who needs to go in and make configurations to either existing or new applications. So we saw how Lynn went through building this application from scratch with what we call a farm. And we said a farm is simply an application. It's how we represent the desired state of an application. So at the top of the demo, we saw how Lynn referenced the Chef server. That is typically something that an administrator will already set up for these end users. So we just saw where that configuration takes place. And we use the cookbooks, the recipes on that server to bootstrap the Apache and Jenkins instances. So we did use separate instances for separate containers here, just for simplicity's sake, but you could also, of course, orchestrate multiple containers into a single server. The system is flexible for you to do with it whatever it is that you need. And we saw how we can edit those applications with attribute and publish the whole thing to the service catalog for easy consumption. Finally, we saw how Scalr cleaned up after itself on the Chef server. And the value here is for both the administrator and the ease of use that the administrator can offer up these applications to multiple users, and how they can leverage their existing Chef servers and their existing orchestration. Scalr also has its own orchestration engine, which is event-based automation that you can tie into different events that go off on your infrastructure. That is separate from that, and they can be used in tandem as well. But today we wanted to do everything with Chef, since a lot of our customers do use Chef. So that integration is very important for us. So on the end user side, we made it easier for users to safely use Chef to bootstrap their applications. And on the administrative side, we made it easier to offer up those applications and then prevent configuration drift after that occurs. So I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. You will get the recording for this webinar to your inbox once within 24 hours that we're done here, as well as the link to the step-by-step tutorial that we do have up on our wiki if you want to go through this yourself. If you have any further questions or something that we didn't go into, or anything that you want to learn further about Scalr, feel free to email me directly at ron@scalr.com. Make sure to stay tuned for our next webinar, which is going to be all about cost management. That's a few weeks from now. You'll get some information about that over email as well. Okay, so once again, Lynn, thank you for taking the time to join.
Thank you.
All right, and I'll see you on the next one, everybody.